Hello, Minna.
Hello, Miriam.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very much looking forward. LinkedIn kind of brought us together.
LinkedIn did via Berlin Change Day community.
I
Yeah,
did not know this link.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who exactly was like, oh, you should talk to Miriam because this is in relation to the facilitator project that I'm working
Mm,
on. I'll have to look back at my messages, but yeah, someone that I know from Berlin. Mhm.
beautiful. And you say facilitator project. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do insofar as how people would understand the process. It's similar to calling myself a coach. I use it as a common vernacular versus an authentic self-identifier.
Like the distinction.
Yeah, because I started facilitating, and I didn't even refer to it as facilitation years ago, and I did it more from the perspective of my background as in theater. And so I really approached it more as director than facilitator. And so I never called myself a facilitator to start. I was leading workshops is how I always looked at it.
Hmm.
But a facilitator is what people understand. So that's what we go with.
Interesting. Thank you. And I'm fascinated how many facilitators actually do come from a more theater background or acting background. And it always strikes me this opposition between authenticity and playing a role, scripted versus emergence. And somehow it seems to then merge into beautiful emergent facilitation and presence in the end.
There are two distinct ways that I see that as sort of an obvious and intuitive integration. Because when I tell people that I have a background as an actor, and to give people context, I have an undergraduate and master's degree in acting. So really went all in. When I think about acting, and especially now being applied play and confident communication trainer and coach, it's all about performance and high performance and acting and performing are the same thing. Great acting requires great performance. Great performance does not require great acting.
Mhm,
So there's the principles of performance, which is one, and then there's the principles of authenticity.
mhm.
And when I think about, at least in the methodology in which I was trained as an actor, or the technique that I was trained under, it's not about playing a character. It's not about pretending. It's not about sort of being anything other than you. It is actually about being the most genuine, immediate, truthful expression of self in pursuit of a definitive action. So, at its core, acting is standing bravely and telling the truth in the face of extraordinary circumstances.
Thank you. Such beautiful words. And what comes to my mind is the ability to access the pure emotions or to access parts of ourselves, although they are not intrinsically triggered, but externally demanded,
Well, and think
invited.
about us absolutely. Theater, whether you're on stage in a play, whether you're a facilitator in space, all acting is similar to all improv is, and arguably all facilitation is listening and responding,
Mm,
which means I receive and I respond. And we go back and forth, and it becomes now this energetic cyclical dialogue. And that's it.
yeah. And then True. The more we are present with our emotions and connected, the better we can actually listen and respond.
That's it.
Mm, thank you. And then you mentioned performance and acting, and you referred to play. So for me, play is the exact opposite of performance.
Say more.
The way I understand play is an activity that we do without without the need to be productive, efficient, or to have a specific outcome. So play is a goal in itself,
Mm,
at least
mm,
in my understanding, where performance is linked to an outcome, an external measurement, evaluation,
mm, mm,
which is in play. And then, okay, then it depends what kind of play, right? If we play soccer, if we play sports, of course there's a performance part. If we play a board game, there's a winner. If we play with Lego, it is pure play. Unless we do it for business reasons. Oh, so complex.
Oh, what a web we weave. Um, Let me see if I can respond to all of these things sort of in order. Um, because it triggers two very distinct things for me. One being um, the way that I define play at its core, which I also write about in my book, is the intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness. So
Mm-hmm.
even through the mode of preparation,
Mm-hmm.
we can still activate this kinetic space of unpredictability, which is one thing. Living on the precipice of not knowing, even if we have a determinant and previously realized endpoint.
This means that ultimately every workshop and every brainstorming as a creative activity is play.
Correct. Yes. And every conversation is play.
Oh,
Every
I wish
walk,
it was.
every, right? Well, it can be.
Yeah.
You cannot control others, but you can control how you show up into that conversation. And if the intent for you is to cultivate a space of unpredictability and aliveness,
Mm.
now that by extension has a direct impact on the way in which someone else might be primed or prone then to re-engage with you. So you're leading by example. So there's that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
What there's also an important point to distinguish is there's free play,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you're talking about, sort of on the playground, play for play's sake. And then there's deliberate play, play with purpose, play in service of something, play. Let's say we're in a brainstorm session. Even if we don't know what the result will be, we can structure and scaffold the play space to help us come to some sort of collective decision or understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So free play and deliberate play, two different things. There's also finite game and infinite game.
Oh, I love them.
So if we think about now, even deliberate play operating in infinite game space, we can play for the sake of playing, but do so with a level of purpose and intention.
As long as we keep on playing.
That's it.
Mm. Thank you for putting this beautiful kind of structure around it. And now that we have a structure, we can dive into the different areas. And one that immediately caught my attention is the sentence, every conversation is play. Tell us more. How can we turn in every conversation into play, although it might be challenging, difficult, charged?
What I think we first need to do is broaden the scope of our concept of what constitutes play, meaning play is not always fun. Play can be serious, it can be arduous, it can be highly technical, it can feel like there are moments of conflict and contention. That also adds to the drama and the release once it's resolved.
Hmm.
Play is not unserious at all. It is not frivolous pursuit of ridiculous outcome. So if we think about play in its most essential form, again, listening and responding, we can now activate the core principle of play in conversations by becoming active listening participants, which, as I'm sure most of us can recognize, is a lost art. This
Mm.
process of genuine attention, of active, honest listening. When the space of unpredictability also comes from the surrender of control to the flow of conversation. So, although I might carry an objective, let's say I'm in a sales conversation and I want to close the deal.
Hmm.
Well, if I'm only driving with, here's what I know about the product, here's what I assume about you, here are the things that people like you have wanted in the past, here's what I've already determined in terms of what you need, that is not play. That's enforcement. And if I come in rather with curiosity and an intent to listen, still
Mm.
with an objective of how can I now strategically navigate the conversation, but I can only do so genuinely, authentically, and presently if I'm listening toward my desired outcome, that now becomes a landscape of play because there's the element of unpredictability.
Beautiful. And to me, it sounds as if there is a mindset and a skill set component. So the skill set is the listening, is the strategic navigation, if we do have an agenda, a goal. Um, and then the mindset is the embracing the unpredictability. Because
Mm-hmm.
and this might maybe be the most difficult part, because in general, if something is unpredictable, it causes stress. So we want to control. That's why we are doing all these things. Um, so the moment where we try to control the unpredictable in order to reduce our stress, we automatically get out of play mode.
Correct. That is when we move into predetermination, and ultimately that falls into the category of habit of perfectionism.
Mm.
And as we know in facilitation, one of the key things to cultivate is adaptability and agility. And oftentimes that is the outcome of imperfection.
Yes.
And so if we are so attached and committed to this idea of predetermination with an idealized version of how it will all conclude,
Mm.
we are, yes, it is a mindset to sort of be open and surrender to the fact that it may not go according to plan.
Yeah. And then there's the ego attached. Because
Mm-hmm.
who tells that the outcome that I have envisioned is really the best outcome? So the facilitator mindset would say the group holds the wisdom, so they know, not me.
Correct.
And yeah, then to lean into that.
There's, I see this all the time. And I, one of my firm beliefs is all the information you need in the moment when called to rise to the occasion lies outside yourself.
Mm.
All the information on how to proceed on
Outside
this
yourself.
outside yourself. There's the intuition.
Hmm.
There's the catalyst of embodied certainty
Hmm.
brought about by learned experience and earned wisdom.
Hmm.
That lives in you, but that's all the embodiment. So
Hmm.
the body is going to be your greatest asset in terms of leading you into how to know what to respond to and how to respond.
Mm.
But still, the trigger point is external because I'm listening.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the perfectionism. Yes, exactly. It's exactly that. We try to predetermine. We have an understanding of what perfect is. And and what I find funny enough is that nobody likes other people to be perfect anyway.
We hate it. When we see someone, I talk about this for public speakers. I'm like, you have no flaw in your speech. And although that may feel safe to you, it actually sounds strange to my ear. I need some filler words. I need ums. I need you to have a moment of rumination. I need it.
Yes, and I think we need it for two reasons. One is because it makes them human and approachable. So there's a trust component. And I think that's something, um, yeah, our gut tells us. Or if it's too polished, something is fishy. So rather not trust. And I think the other one is also ego. If we meet someone who's so perfect, it just reminds us of our own imperfection. And then in the context of creativity or workshop where it's supposed to be imperfect and messy, if we arrive with everything so polished, then nobody dares to interfere or to
Mm,
do something with it.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's the permission to also be flawed because, as we know, perfection does not exist in the realm of human behavior. And when we try to present it as such, we distinctly fail. But I think the most important point that you mentioned there is the trust component. If we perceive that there's an absence of truth, again, acting, performing, facilitating at its core is truth telling, standing bravely, telling the truth in the face of extraordinary circumstances. And if we determine or intuit an absence of truth, there will inherently, by extension, be an absence of trust.
Mm, yeah. So how do you, or is then pure authenticity the easiest way to build trust? Or what are strategies, ways
Mhm.
to build this trust with a group?
I struggle with the word authenticity, and I believe in the word authenticity. First of all, I firmly believe that authenticity is always the way. Where I think there's slight confusion in terms of what it means in terms of permission to be authentic in this
Mhm.
world is that does not give you absolute permission to exist without the compassionate awareness that you exist in this world and of this world,
Mm.
and your actions are consequential on others. There's this notion of uh, ethical intelligence, which is an extension of emotional intelligence, meaning I can not only feel and understand internally, but from an ethical perspective, what ultimately escapes my mouth and I now put on to the world outside of me, I am responsible for. And
Mm.
so, in pursuit of authenticity, everything you feel is valid and valuable. The moment you go to express it, you have a responsibility. So that's where I think we need to take more responsibility around the expression of our
Mm. Yeah. And thank you for this distinction. And it reminds me of the framework by psychological safety, the four stages of psychological, Timothy Clark, where he says it's a function of permission and respect.
authenticity.
So, yes, if you have all the permission or take all the permission without respect, you're your authentic self, but you basically behave like a dick. And if you have no permission but just the respect, then you hold back and you cannot express yourself.
Well, and then if we move into play as also a system design approach,
Mhm.
we can look at this as rules of the game.
Mm,
So if we think the rules don't apply to us, we are now arrogant assholes,
mm,
masquerading as authentic people.
mm,
Whereas if we understand the rules of ethics, the rules of collective responsibility to coexist globally. We can now play those rules fully, maybe break the rules sometime, but still have a respect that rules exist.
Yeah. So transparency and to have this open conversation about what are the rules we are playing by um, are essential. And then this brings back the distinction between the finite and infinite game, where a finite game we have rules and they don't change and the set of players stays the same. And at the end, someone wins.
Mhm.
And the infinite game where everything can change as long as we keep on playing, but then we must know in which game we are and what the rules are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's every workshop I facilitate and pretty much any space I enter where I feel a responsibility to either control or monitor or sort of be in charge of how things flow, either safely or toward a, desired conclusion. We establish rules of the game. Some people look at that as agreements of the
Mhm.
space. I really look at it as rules of the game. So there's the basic things like how to contribute, but then there's also the being rules, like um, share fully, take risks.
Mhm.
Um, and so it can be both from an operational perspective and from an experiential perspective. And the rules can also grant permission because we can now hold ourselves accountable to
Yeah.
following those rules.
Yeah. And I love that you frame them as rules of the game because it also brings this time limit to the space where, okay, can we agree to the rules of the game? We apply that for this time of the workshop. And then afterwards, it's on you whether you want to continue, change, or dismiss them.
That's it. And they're co-created rules also.
Yeah.
So to your point, I don't come in knowing what's best for the group. The group defines the rules.
Yeah. And and although when I co-create rules or guiding principles for the group, there are always the being parts that come up. Of course, we be open-minded, non-judgmental. Um, and right now, I just wonder how can we ask a group or individuals to be different? If someone is not open-minded, this can be a character trait, it can be trauma, it can be a bad day. So, what would be a more gentle way to actually frame that, to invite them to maybe be a little bit more open-minded?
Being open-minded is a dictate as opposed to a rule. And because to your point, it's hard to tell someone to open their mind when their mind is distinctly closed. Rather, stay curious,
Mm,
which, if they're closed, might open it up, or at the very least, challenge them to stay present and
yeah,
attentive.
yeah. And then encourage them to ask a question before judging
Mhm.
or making assumptions. But I loved it. I think it was the Hasso-Plattner Institute in in Potsdam. They had a big poster. I had it in my office for a long time. Deferred judgment. So it was not about stop judgment. Like, okay, if we can just defer judgment until the end of the workshop, that's all we need for today. I actually love that.
I tell people, leave your judgment at the door. You can, notice if it comes in, that's fine. But then, like, hold it and discuss it over cocktails later. But now is not the time. You've made the distinct decision to be here, even if it's an obligatory training. But you're here. Make this time matter. Surprise yourself, delight yourself.
Yeah. And then the framing all of that into more play framework. Um, Makes total sense. And I would like to pick up a thread that we left when we before we hit the record button. I was like, no, don't talk about this right now. We have to bring it to the audience. Um, the fact that there are not many books about play that actually focus on adult play. And I wonder, and I mentioned I had so many conversations about play already on the podcast. And there's still something that surprises me, and there are many aspects that I'm like, oh yeah, I've I heard that already and I still forgot. So play seems to be on everyone's mind. Everyone is at least curious to bring more play. And there's still a lot of misconception and judgment around play. Why is it such an under-researched and underwritten field?
This is pure speculation and
Please.
based on entirely anecdotal evidence.
Yes.
That's my disclaimer.
Good. And now you can go for it.
Now I can go for it. Let's go. When at most research that's done, as I mentioned, is in childhood development, the importance of play in terms of social emotional learning, boundary setting, risk taking, sort of understanding constraint, understanding self within, presence of others. So play in developmental modes is absolutely essential, both deliberate and free play. What I hear from most people, and again, I'll position this in terms of my work, which is specifically working with large organizations to bring play to their people, is they have forgotten how to play, which, PS, is one of the first actions we learn how to do. What's that over there? That's play. How does this work? That's play. Ooh, who are you? That's play. Connecting, curiosity, testing, taking risks. That's all play. As soon as we then embody either internally or either externally imposed consequence of risk taking from the ego perspective or from getting punished, right? We now start to limit the way in which we understand permission to be messy, flawed, fail, uh, inappropriate, all of these things. So it's the first thing we do, and it's one of the first things that we let go of once we sort of move into these later stages of development through adolescence and then into early adulthood. So we understand the importance in early development. There has not been an appreciation about its importance for longevity, continued vitality, cognitive functionality, social emotional wellness, especially as we reach older age. Ask a bunch of octogenarians what one of the most valuable resources for them. They will say friendship,
Mm,
laughter,
it's play.
right? Play, adventure, staying active. That is all play. But because we don't see it as essential to continue development because we are already concretized,
Hmm.
we no longer perceive its inherent value
Mm,
because the research is not, maybe it is, again, there's not research, so we don't know, but we can see it tangibly on the cognitive development, the neurological development of children. We can see sort of the brains adapt through play. For adults, there's not as much growth transformation that can happen. Our neuroplasticity can be sort of shaped and transformed, but in terms of our composition, it's pretty well complete.
hmm.
So then play now becomes less of an interesting study. Um, and we just deprioritize it because there are more important things like making money and winning the political game.
And what just came to my mind is this concept of unpredictability and And the fact that play kind of was pushed out of the professional sphere, because in the professional, we want it to be predictable, make money, industrialization, clockwork, all of that, um, which is no longer applicable, as we know. So the embracing the unpredictability, agility, the playfulness, the creativity
Mm.
has to come back. And I think the
Here's
adjustments seem to lag behind.
well, and here's sort of how and I yes and yes and to that. The era of industrialization, I would argue, caught us socially by surprise.
Mm,
We were like, oh, similar to the cognitive era, way back when Homo sapiens really sort of came and we're like, oh, I have a neofrontal cortex. I'm able to make critical and creative decisions, right? Independent of my primal urges.
mhm.
That caught us by surprise. And uh, Yuval Noah Harari talks about this also in both Sapiens and then in his follow-up book, Homo Deus, but sort of how we
I cannot hear you anymore. Worst case, just take the headset off. It's very weird. I know.
I'm gonna try
Yeah.
to.
Yes.
I can hear it because I just turned them off. Let me try one more time.
Yes.
can you hear
You
me?
can. Yes, I hear you.
Okay. Yeah, let me know if that happens again. Very strange.
So, I lost you. Yuval Harari in *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*.
Mm-hmm. He talks about our brains, our understanding, and I'm putting understanding in full quotations here because our evolutionary understanding and capacity has not kept pace with our cognitive understanding and capacity.
Mm,
So we are evolving from a production perspective faster than we are actually capable of keeping pace with internally.
mm,
Let's take, for example, AI. So, or even the industrialized era. We had this amazing vision for creating assembly lines and automation, right? Get as many cars out as possible, Um, that is counter to the way that emotionally, psychologically, we are actually at. So we've evolved faster in terms of our output than we have internally in terms of our actual human ability to live there. So we just haven't caught up. So I think the Industrial Revolution, we were like, ah, and I think similarly with the onset of AI and emergent technology and the rapidity of innovation, we are trying to keep up. We cannot exist in that space. And so then the necessity of us to eliminate the essential things like spaciousness for creativity
mm,
and imagination and genuine connection and authentic listening now become either expedited or eliminated
mm.
in service of productivity. And play has no space there. But we know, so we're trying to keep up with where we are, right? It's gone faster than we
Yeah.
can actually keep up with. And what we're going to come into very stark awareness around, and my prediction is within the next 5 years, and that's generous, an obsolete aspect of humanity, human
Mm.
workforce within industry, because so much of it will have been automated and we under nurture the essential skill sets that make humans essential.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what you shared also explains our overreaction to this email that totally sets us off and makes us react as if we're um, uh, that we're facing a tiger. That our brains and our emotions didn't keep up with the evolution of the technology. And it reminds me of have you read Cal Newport's new book, Slow Productivity?
No, but I'm going to add it to my
I'm
list.
totally obsessed with that one since my summer vacation. And he says something that came to my mind when I heard you speaking is that for this post-industrialized age, there's no way to actually measure productivity because productivity was always the output and the time. So more output in less time. But if output is actually a more of a creative or a more intellectual thing, then we cannot measure it with the same things as we measure how many cars we are producing. So, of course, more cars in less time are good. But an author, is it really more words in less time? Maybe not. Maybe it's about the quality of the words.
Well, and this brings me back to sort of why is there not a lot of research? And also why companies are slow to pick up on this in terms of employee development, why I think so many of our institutions are slow to pick up on this as an essential aspect to organizational development, organizational success, is it is challenging, if not impossible, to quantify the impact of play, of authenticity, of immediacy, of presence. It is really, we've tried in my organization for years to measure confidence,
Mm.
but even that can be tied back to things like, because I did this, I now feel I can do that.
Mm.
But to say play actually had an impact on our quarterly earnings,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to create data. So therefore, it's deprioritized because the things that you can quantifiably attach to financial success are things that are, again, not going to allow humans to be essential.
Yeah. It's interesting. He says the exact same thing. There's no research on productivity, how to measure productivity in the post-industrial age, because it's ways too complex. And then to isolate the impact of play, because usually when you bring more play into an organization, you also bring so many other things. And yeah, and play needs spaciousness and freedom.
It needs spaciousness and freedom. It also needs a rebrand because I think people still perceive it as frivolous pursuit of ridiculous outcome. It is a nice to have, not a need to have. And for
Yeah.
me, I am like, wake up, people. Wake up. Play is the thing. And whether it's play or whether it's storytelling or whether it's meditation or whether it's mindfulness or whether it's painting or whether it's taking walks or whether it's a book club, I don't care. It's the spaciousness to soften the brain. Why play is essential, and this I'm getting on my soapbox now. Why play is essential
Please.
is because we are most at ease when we are at play. And when we are at ease, this does not mean disengaged. This does not mean committed and intentionally in pursuit of. It simply means at ease. That means our sympathetic nervous system has been deactivated. It means we now have the cognitive capacity to think creatively, to connect meaningfully, to make critical decisions, to respond with a level of adaptability required in this future of work. So play is essential, not because it makes you feel better in terms of feeling fun and like it's a nice kind of break for people. It's because it creates the habit, experience, and cultivation of ease.
Mm. Yeah. And it's basically the exact opposite of the fight, flight, freeze stress response. Yeah.
100%. And everything we are doing right now, especially when it comes to organizational design, is predicated on the finite game construct.
Mm-hmm.
And the finite games are becoming more and more expedited. So the way that we are expected to play those games is not sustainable, and it keeps us in a mild stress response.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it becomes difficult to change that, because if we want to change an entire, and I'm thinking of just over the summer holidays, I read a novel about the end of the German separation. So basically, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then an entire society that was um, faced with the ending of the entire belief system.
Mm.
Socialism collapsed.
Ooh. You need to
They
make me a book list.
and it's I read a lot about these times also from the history perspective, but then suddenly being in this novel where um, people lost their jobs, where they worked in newspapers, in the arts, in education, and suddenly everything that they were communicating, believed in, was no longer valid. So maybe that's far-fetched, but when I now think of how organizations work, and suddenly you tell them, okay, we cannot, what you thought was productive um, and to be pursued is actually not. We're taking away an inherent belief and kind of, yeah, security.
100%. Yeah, it requires almost an entire dismantling of. I was working with a client who her specialty is in the psychedelic space, but her primary philosophy is in the practice of psychedelics. And again, whatever your access point is, doesn't matter. But the principle that she sort of believes in, I think holds true and especially applies to this, which is we forget that we are part of nature.
Yeah.
And the systems that work most effectively are the ones that align to the natural order. For example, mycelial networks. They talk and grow and respond and adapt, and it's not about one dominating over the other.
Mhm.
It is an absolutely cooperative system. And as a result, we can grow some of the tallest trees in the world, the oldest trees that have existed in our concept of time. Industries do not have that same longevity
Mm.
because they are built on a system that is unnatural. It can be controlled because we have, again, this cognitive arrogance that lets us believe that we are somehow superior to the workings of nature, that anything that is really capable of having its full expansion and expressiveness in terms of what its potential
Mm.
is based on natural operating systems. And currently we do not do that. So it absolutely requires a dismantling of and a paradigm shift for how we are understanding the building and constructing of successful organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe the opening of the of many governments and medical systems to the possibility of using psychedelics um, in more orthodox medication or treatments. Um, I think that's maybe a step then in the right direction to help people reconnect to themselves, to nature,
Yeah, I
each
agree.
other.
And yeah, even if it's not that, even if it's, I mean, I'm a believer in the power of psychedelic application. I also think that there are other access points. Maybe it's through breath work.
Mm,
Maybe it's essentially what's going to allow you to decentralize the ego from your understanding of your lived experience.
And yeah, and I think the ego very often is just a protection mechanism. So we are so looking at how most organizations work, and as facilitators, we get an inside view so deeply and so with the objectivity as an outsider that we see how broken many of these systems are and um, how much they're led through fear. And of course, people need egos because
You can't
otherwise it's
exist. You can't
dangerous.
succeed. Exactly.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, and then to engage in a practice, yeah, as you said, either breath work or meditation or embodiment or psychedelics to just put the ego down, the mask down, to reduce the fear for a moment.
I think what the most essential thing here is in terms of igniting the process of dismantling this system and belief system specifically is creating those moments to release and surrender. And because once we're there, we're like, oh, again, we feel at ease.
Mm,
But because we spend so much time, we create habits, Miriam. This is all about habits. It is about behavior habits that are so consistently reinforced, they move into the realm of unconscious that we don't even realize we are existing in this space of stress. We don't even realize we are constantly having to put out fires and we are living for the success of somebody that honestly has no commitment or loyalty to us whatsoever.
mm,
And so and I think it's, I don't know how you feel, but I go into these companies sometimes and I, especially working with play for an employees, and oftentimes it's without leadership there.
mm,
And I, all of a sudden, I don't know if it's because of the nature of the work, but they feel this like real permission to all of a sudden share with their experiences, which is, and so oftentimes it's about giving them permission. Oh, I can just say that. Oh, I can like speak like that. Well, what happens if this happens and this happens and I feel bad and I don't know how to? And I'm like, well, why don't you just try this? And they're like, I can do that. And I'm like, yes. For example, use my voice in expressive ways. Sit down when I present. Interrupt somebody if I feel like they are maybe going on a tangent or say something that feels harmful. Challenge somebody in a position of superiority. Yes,
yeah. And all of that requires psychological safety.
correct.
And how do you said that very often it happens in the absence of the leadership. And I've observed exactly the same. In the best cases, the leadership does this consciously and says, okay, we are staying away. And then we want to get the genuine, candid truth afterwards. What is your experience with the leadership, keeping them away, having them stay away, and then reintegrating? Because at the end of the day, Monday morning will come.
I think where organizations continually invest in performative efforts is in leadership thinking that they are not responsible or they have not fully bought into the transformation in which they presume to invest. And inviting them in requires, inviting them back in requires them to understand what is essential to achieve what they're hoping will transform. And so, first of all, it's about saying, don't just be there, know why you're there, and know what you're advocating for. Because your responsibility as a leader is to take our findings, which is ultimately an extension of the expression of truth and vulnerability on behalf of your people. We are their spokesperson. To take that, integrate it, take it seriously, and then come and show up in a meaningful way to continue to drive that forward. The challenge is not only getting people to, and oftentimes that requires them saying, oh, I have a responsibility in this. I have a responsibility in the way that they're feeling because
Mm.
maybe I've done something that isn't as supportive as I thought it was, for example. So again, ego. Ego is a major theme here. The challenge is companies are oftentimes not willing to invest in the time it takes to actually have all of these feelings integrated. So they've provided this initial space for people to play and explore and express. And those findings are then passed along to leadership. And even if there's a follow-up session and leadership is invited, without there now being rules of the game, transparent communication, this notion of psychological and emotional safety, when that power is now dropped back into the equation, are the people subject to that power informed and prepared to be as truthful and transparent as they were when the power was not present? And is the power primed and prepared to receive the truth and expression from the people over whom they exert this power? That now becomes the question. Everybody has to be, it's like, you know, dropping a bit of color paint into sort of the white paint, right? It's like, are we prepared for that immersion?
And to steer the pot.
Yes, correct. And come out with a different color and then paint everything all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, and then again, it's an entire organizational shift that needs to happen, because then how is the power used? Is it really used to support the people or the maybe external shareholders? And if this is not aligned, it's
well,
also impossible.
I came to this very, very unfortunate realization, which I think I've known for a long time, and it's been a pain point, but I sort of put it into very stark terminology, which is organizations, as they currently stand, are not committed to making their people remarkable. They're committed to giving what is required to demonstrate that they are doing what is required to so keep pace with their peer organizations. Oh, we offer public speaking. Oh, we offer unconscious bias training. Oh, we offer, technical training. Check, 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 check. But teaching and learning are two different things. And the learning is what leads to remarkable performance. The teaching is just information dissemination. And so without the integrity and intent to integrate that learning, we now actually do a disservice, and it's counterproductive to the actual performance leveling of our people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then part of the learning is the practice.
That's the integration part. And that is the piece where they just like, they don't.
Yeah.
And that's where the remarkableness happens.
Yeah.
And when I say remarkable, I really want to sort of zoom in on this for a second, because I think this is something worthwhile considering. And I also write about this in my book as I write about confidence, because I think remarkable and confidence can probably be sort of similar in this. When we think about it, there may be sort of an intuitive attachment to an archetype that is representative of a remarkable person. Similarly with confidence, there may be an archetype that we attribute confidence to and either want to be that or sense that we can never achieve that.
So
and
like
that
a role model?
A role model, maybe. Archetype specifically being, let's say confidence, big, bold, loud, charismatic, remarkable being maybe smart, clever, disruptive, engaging, maybe also charismatic. And so when we talk about sort of this notion of remarkable, it's really worthwhile considering the being versus the outcome. So someone that is remarkable, that we might attribute the label of remarkable to, what is that? What are they doing? What are they expressing, or how are they behaving that gives us the impression of remarkable? That then becomes the space of learning. And what that usually amounts to is a willingness to dare and fail.
Hmm.
A distinct curiosity and collaborative intention to create and generate something new. The idea to contribute novel understanding and ask the dumb question and say the stupid thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the willingness to show these people, so that they're also remarkable to others, so that others can see it. And I think there's so many trainings on feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And also when I deliver training on feedback, we often forget how important the positive feedback is. So how can we praise the people and help them to stand out so that they become also role models, and that it becomes the norm to be remarkable?
Mm-hmm. And remarkable for an introvert may be different for an
Mm,
extrovert, may be different for a neurodivergent individual. So I think it's really also worthwhile saying, how can we democratize the criteria?
mm,
And then how can we train in a way that feels A, supportive of general skill building and behavior change, and acute enough to be responsive to a variety of personal expression.
yeah. And that's an entire other huge field. Seeing that, I think according to current research, 20% of the workforce are in the neurodivergent spectrum. That means one
Mm-hmm.
out of five, which means that I think most don't even know that they might be part, not have not been diagnosed. So I would say it's rather maybe the double. So whom are we talking about? It's actually, it means
Me?
that everyone is very different from each other, and there is no such thing as neurotypical.
I think it's what's interesting to me is I'm going to take us into a slightly different category, which is the Kinsey scale, which is the spectrum of sexual identity.
Mm,
And that was so groundbreaking because we had just thought of people as homosexuals or heterosexuals, right? So it was binary. And all of a sudden, he introduced this spectrum where now most people fell outside of this centralized version
mhm,
of normal. Similarly, I think when it comes to neurological development and capacity, we have understood, and we can even use ADHD as an example of this,
mhm,
which has like really had an upsurgence since people started to understand the nuance of expression. Most people likely fall similar to the Kinsey scale
mhm.
on the neurodivergent to neurotypical scale. There's probably most of us fall like somewhere outside of the spectrum of normal,
Yeah,
quote unquote. Yeah,
yeah. And then what is normal?
exactly. And
Yeah,
that's why, honestly, Miriam, that's why I'm just like, employees do not wait for organizations to change. They will not. They will have to at some point. They will reach a point of crisis where they cannot retain people, where they are realizing that it is so much more expensive to bring people on and get them onboarded to the point of them caring enough to contribute meaningful ideas. So, A, don't wait for that. Don't wait to start living your life because right now, how you are living is the most essential thing. And you have one life that you're conscious to. The organization that you're a part of likely is not fostering the full expression of your human potential, especially because of things like we just discussed, the spectrum of neurodivergent versus neurotypical. They may not be built and constructed in a way that is really meaningful toward the way that you can be a most valuable contributor.
yeah.
Do it on your own.
Amen.
Amen. I tell them, I mean, this is why I'm like, this is probably why companies hate me because I'm just like, hey, employees, stop giving a fuck. You're welcome. Bye bye. That's my main message. I'm just like, you have one life. You holding back because you think you might get in trouble is not only doing your company a disservice, but it's doing you a disservice.
Yeah. And then there's so many layers to it. um, I'm currently reading how our best behavior. I neither remember the title of the book nor the author. It's a woman writing about how the seven deadly sins have impacted how women show up in the world and
Interesting.
how we are holding back constantly because pride is a deadly sin and desire is a deadly sin and all of that. Um, and
It's really
once
fascinating. Yeah.
and once we stop giving a fuck or start giving less fucks, suddenly we have all this realm of possibility opening up. Um, yeah.
You think about the historical growth of an evolution, I guess, of social behavior, especially as women. It's so interesting. I because we think that we are making decisions, and ultimately those a lot of our decisions were adapted and determined well before us. I I'm curious to read this book, because it also reminds me of a book I've just finished called Dancing in the Streets: A History of Collective Joy, and talking specifically about how this notion of collective effervescence or collective celebration uh, became constrained and diminished, especially upon the rise of Protestantism.
Mm.
And so we had, uh, and to a savage degree, literally, a suppression and repression of the desire to express joy, because we might, your point with the sins, be demonized and go to hell.
Mm.
We were not being our most uh, um, devout when we were in moments of joy, because that was the devil's expression of desire. And this was way back. This was 1700, And so thinking about how that has now reinforced itself over time, where we have like socially lost it. We find it in some places, like sporting events and concerts, but the ability to, A, as a woman, live with pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Live with lust, live with greed, and give yourself permission to feel all these things similar to joy, but it's been sort of diminished and ingrained that it's inappropriate. And so we don't really, it's like taboo, right? It feels a little dirty and secret. But you're right. The moment we give ourselves permission, what is unleashed? Talk about becoming remarkable, right? That
Yes.
is the access point. All of a sudden you're like, whoa, I can be this person. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can be. You are that. You can be. You are that. You already are.
Yeah. Or the invisible chains.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, gluttony came to my mind and how
Mm.
most women just grow up with calorie counting and not allowing ourselves to eat what we want to eat, and thereby totally forgetting what the sensation of our bodies and how it feels to be hungry or full.
Yeah.
Tangent.
Yeah.
Um,
All that.
yes. Um, Juicy conversation. Thank you. One of my favorites. What is the one thing that you would have liked to know before when you just got started?
What has sort of been a central personal investigation, intentional learning, intentional curiosity, intentional practice is a sense of embodied self, free of a need to prove, need to be validated. And although those are fear-based experiences, when I first began, and this was maybe 26 when I started facilitating, so a while. But golly, back then my little neofrontal cortex, it had just gelled. I just come into sort of like full like cognitive, con concreteness. Um, but I hadn't yet really initiated to any meaningful degree this exploration. And so I was still really operating through proving, validation, acceptance. Um, I'm smart enough, I'm talented, I can do it. And so I wish I had known the power of surrender
Mm.
and listening, because so although those are fear-based, how they express themselves, at least for me, was not through a withholding, but rather through an overcompensation, which expressed itself in the form of arrogance.
Mm.
And that has been something that I feel the residue of. And I that is my main criteria when I enter spaces now. It has nothing to do with me. And that's sort of the driving principle.
Beautiful. And what a journey of personal growth.
It is my life's purpose. And I think that I was listening to this podcast, this guy, Michael Singer, and he talks about spirituality and spiritual practice. Um, and he was like, our only purpose is to be ecstatic expressions of joy. That's it. And of course, that takes an ego unlocking to access that. But now, if we can sort of and I have not embodied that. I don't even know if I can even intellectually really kind of like ground myself in that concept. I'm trying. Um, but now, if we sort of remove that, now we understand that these moments of success or failure or achievement or accomplishment have very little bearing on the ultimate intent of one's awareness of our lived experience. And really, the intent is to lead with love and receive with love. That's literally the only point. And so that now becomes the practice.
Mm.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I have the impression that the receiving with love or receiving full stop might actually be the more difficult part for most. Maybe even more difficult for women or people who grew up being raised as women.
I totally agree.
Mm.
Uh, I wonder sometimes if that is a matter of perceived worth. I would rather like to believe that it is, just as we expressed with sort of the seven deadly sins and the experience of joy, a learned experience, and one that, if we think, because we have our physical body, we have our sort of spiritual body, we have our emotional body and our energetic body, gross body and subtle body, if you want to sort of think about it categorically in sort of binary terms. So the subtle body are the things that are intangible. That takes just as much, arguably, if not more, practice and awareness than the exercise of the gross body. Gross body being skin, organs, bones. Skin is an organ, but epidermis. And because we can now put it in the realm of physical experience, even an intangible one, we can now direct our lens toward an understanding of the experience around the wellness of the spiritual and emotional body.
Mm.
And we can get indications from the energetic expression of our gross body. For example, I felt it in my gut. I have a frog in my throat. I've got butterflies. That's a spiritual body. That's the emotional body. And when we can for me, I'm othering this. Let me put this in sort of my terms so I don't impose this on others. Obviously, a hyper individualized investigation. The notion of receiving feels for me like there's a strong sense of desire emanating from my sternum that also is accompanied by fear that I can logically maybe understand as vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And zooming in on that and breathing through that and allowing that opening to happen. We don't know how the receiving will happen, right? So talking about this notion of predetermination and perfectionism, we don't know how the receiving will happen. All we know is that we can practice the process of the openness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think it is a practice and something we can relearn.
Totally. And I
Just
love
saying
that you
thank you.
said relearn. Yeah, because we can do it innately. We do it innately.
Just saying thank you when we receive without explaining, returning something.
I do it all the time though. I love your sweater. Oh my God, thank you. You know, I got it at the thrift store and it was like really expensive. Just receive. Receive full stop.
Exactly.
It's challenging.
And it's powerful,
Mm.
I think, to just receive with a thank you. Also for the other person, because they're not interested whether it was on sale or expensive or whatsoever. They just wanted to say something nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And giving them that gift as well, the gift of generosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the listening. Yeah. What remains your facilitation challenge?
I think where I'm at now in my work is when I was just facilitating presentation skills, storytelling, public speaking, like, that shit's easy, right? It is for me. I'll say that, right? I'm a subject matter expert, like easy, do it in my sleep, fine. It because I've reached a point in my work where the skills are less interesting than the theory and philosophy. Now the challenge becomes, and this is why I can't teach public speaking anymore, because I'm just like, I don't care what you do with your hands. It's not interesting. I want you to bring your hands to life, right? My challenge is getting people finding a way, not getting them, they do that on their own, but finding a way to deliver the theory and philosophy in a short period of time while also leaving them with something that feels tangible and actionable.
Mm.
Yeah, that's my challenge. Because bringing your hands to life versus what do I do with my hands, very different concepts, very similar outcomes.
Yeah. And then I find it interesting, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with Mark Walsh, who is the embodiment guru. And he doesn't want anyone to speak about energy in his workshop. Because he's like, okay, energy is just woo. What are we actually talking about? And so bringing your hands to life is sounds great. And we all kind of know what it means. And then there are some, and we talked about neurodivergent, and we're like, so what does it mean? So what am I doing with my hands? But then I can imagine, and that's where the magic lies, and that's why it's a challenge, I suppose, is you can say, okay, do this and that with your hand and show your palms and use them in certain direction or pace. And by doing that according to plan, doesn't bring them to life.
Correct. Yeah. I don't want to see the mechanics. I want to see,
Exactly. Because
I want to see,
because it lacks play.
100%. Yeah. What I'll
Because it's
usually have them,
predictable.
that's it. I will have them present something non-verbally.
Mm.
Yeah. It's like your gesture. Your gesture is an extension of your intuitive thought. Yeah.
And I find it fascinating to observe facial expressions of people and how many have, I would say, unlearned to really use all the muscles in their face to express their feelings, their thoughts.
And that's where the silliness is, right? I say silly is your superpower. So we think of play as a mechanism, play as a theory. Silliness is the experience for me, if because silliness is so vulnerable. We can play, right? Play is serious. I can be like, what move do I make? But then if I'm like, hey, be silly in that movement, now all of a sudden we're like, ah, and I'm like, yeah, the willingness to feel silly is our superpower. Yeah, that's really where it comes to life. Because if I say, oh, I'm just gonna, move my face in ridiculous ways and like stick my tongue out, like really use my voice. Um, uh, People don't understand the power that comes with that release.
Yes. And it's because, and then we're full circle where we started. This only has the power if it comes from this very authentic thought experience. Because if I play silly to override my tension, my nervousness, or because I want to be funny, it is not. And then it's actually quite,
Cringy.
yes.
People that try to be funny aren't funny. If it can that be our main takeaway from today, I would love to get that message out into the world. Stop trying to be funny, people. You will not be
Yeah.
funny if you try to be funny. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one lesson I did a clown workshop once upon a time. That was my first lesson from the clown. Don't try to be funny.
Mm-mm.
A clown doesn't try
Genu
and doesn't try to
Genuinely.
please. Doesn't try to
Exactly.
please, doesn't try to be funny.
No. Yeah. The comedy comes from the upsetting of expectation,
Yes.
the release of tension,
Mm.
not the humor.
Or the mirror that the being seen of like, oops.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you know?
Correct.
Yeah. Mm. I have one last question that I have to ask because it's on my list. Um, talking about expectations. What makes a workshop fail?
Uh, I wrote this down. A commitment to content over a commitment to learning.
Mm. Love that. The script again, it's a predictability, the non-play. So
I led
consistent.
a yeah, right. I led a workshop in Chicago a few weeks ago, and we kind of went off agenda. And as I was leaving, there was one gentleman who was asking beautiful questions, like applicable questions, not agenda questions, but questions that still informed the conversation. And so as I was leaving, he said, "I'm so sorry for pulling us off topic." I was like, "Oh, no, no. You were exactly on topic. You were off agenda, but you were on topic." And
Mm.
so I think that's really now becomes the primary point.
Oh, I love that. Being off agenda but on topic. And that's what really matters.
Correct. Yeah. You're there for the topic. You're not there for the agenda. The agenda is the framework to explore the topic.
It's a mic dropping moment. Thank you so, so much, Minna. It was a delight.
Gosh, Miriam, same. I'm like, what a beautiful way to start the day.
Yeah. Exploring all these different areas around play, some tangents, long list of books to read. So looking forward to meeting you in Amsterdam.
Yes, soon. I hope.
Yes. It's the end of my podcasting.